Natural disasters becoming more frequent worldwide. On Friday, the UN commemorated the International Day of Disaster Reduction. Now, it's aimed at creating awareness and figuring out preventative measures. We can't stop it, but we can prepare for it, hopefully. South Africa is especially vulnerable, that with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change identifying the entire SADC region as one of the world's climate change hotspots. Is that good news for us? Bad news for us? Let's find out. Moses Khangale, a disaster risk management expert at Santam, joining us this afternoon. Moses, good to have you with us on a Sunday afternoon. You're very, very kind. So if we look at South Africa, where are we on disaster risk management? Do we have a lot to be desired?
Thanks, Gareth, and good afternoon to your viewers. I think I'll contextualize my response to your question by firstly indicating that the United Nations, as you correctly indicated, has designated the 13th of October as the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. And the theme for this year is fighting inequality to build resilient communities. And I'm starting off with that because, Gareth, one needs to appreciate that the risks that we are facing are driven by a lot of factors. Among others is, of course, inequality, is climate change, is urbanization. And one of the other issues that we have seen over the last 20 years within the disaster management space relates to the paradigm shift from response-oriented approaches towards disaster risk reduction. And South Africa is part of that evolution. But I think to answer your question directly, I would say that there's more that we need to do. We need to evolve our approaches more quickly towards resilience building and community-level risk reduction.
Because we seem to have these conversations, Moses, every time there's flooding, every time there's a disaster, every time there's severe weather, it seems that all the experts, including yourself, the weather experts, management of risk experts, all seem to know the problem, but it seems to come across as though government is always caught on the back foot. It's as though they didn't know this was going to happen, and suddenly we're scrambling to help those who need assistance. Everyone seems to know it. Government doesn't seem to be paying attention.
Yeah, look, thanks for that, Gareth. I think what is critical is that we need to strengthen our institutional systems and ensure that the bulk of the focus is on what is that we could do proactively to reduce risks. That is why from our space as Santam, we have also adopted this notion that is championed by the Sendai framework around an all-of-society approach, which is anchored on partnerships. And we have collaborated, we continue to collaborate with various cities across the country to proactively support initiatives that could reduce risks, but also contribute to enhanced preparedness so that when these incidents happen, they find that systems on the ground are more robust and that the institutional capacity is dynamic enough and fit for purpose to enable the management of these risks at hand. So that's something that I think we need to do more. We also need consistent messaging, Gareth, including by the media around the whole importance of risk reduction. Because historically what you see is that the focus is on disaster response. Yeah. And we know that it's too late to respond and it's not efficient to protect the most vulnerable. We need to focus on what is that we can do proactively to reduce risks on the ground.
Yeah, it's a terrible cliche, isn't it, Moses? But the prevention is better than cure. Stereotype seems to come to mind here as well. If we were as good as preventing natural disasters as we are at responding to them, might not be so bad. Let's talk municipalities for a second. Right now we're talking very broad, Moses. Let's just zero in. Let's just zoom into the municipalities as well. It's not the entire country that's being flooded out. It's not the entire country that's burning to the ground. There's certain municipalities that seem to be higher risk areas than the rest of the country. What does a municipality do? I'll tell you why I'm asking. Because a municipality relies on a city relies on provincial government relies on national government, and so on and so forth. So how does a municipality take what you're saying and try and put it into action?
No, thanks. I think there's a lot that a municipality could do. because the starting point, Gareth, is that South Africa has a very strong and robust, one of the best legislation in the world. So we need to strengthen implementation of legislation. Yes, you're talking about the role of the various spheres of government in risk reduction. But what we're saying from where we sit is that, and the legislation is very clear about that, that there's space for private sector, there's space for civil society organization, and for community-based organization to be mobilized and engaged in risk reduction, because the risk at hand are way beyond most of the capacity of most of the municipalities. So that is why we invest a lot of resources in providing proactive training, in building capacity of firefighters and disaster managers, in supporting systems, be it geographic information systems, be it provision of smoke alarms in informal settlements that are prone to fires, and so on and so forth. But what we have also noted, Gareth, is that you cannot talk effective risk management without appreciating the effect of climate change. That is why we also partner municipalities to help them develop climate change adaptation plans, so that they have a forward-looking approach in terms of how their risks are going to be affected by changing climate, and account for that in their service delivery programming and planning, so that they are not caught off guard. So that's the type of work that we are doing. And I think there's space for more partners within the private sector to come into the space. And we're really keen and willing to share our framework and model around how we've been doing it for the last 10 years.
There could be critics, Moses, as I say goodbye to you, that's going to come back and say, well, this isn't in Santam's best interest to be mitigating the risk because you make money when things go wrong, don't you?
We do, but if you look at the focus areas, we work in various spaces. In some spaces, we don't have major exposures. We work in those spaces from a pure social justice imperative and point of view. So there's a fine balance that we are aware of. But generally, we work in informal settlements, we work in rural areas and in urban settlements, where we do not necessarily have a lot of clients and exposures, as it were. And there are instances where we work in spaces where we also contribute to helping the cities and communities, and of course ourselves, to minimize and reduce risks that we all face.
When you talk about the private-public partnerships, that seems to be the buzzword, the buzz saying at the moment, public-private partnerships. What does Santam want government to do, or municipalities, or cities, or mayors? What are you asking them to do to make it easier for them with your expertise? Clearly, you've got a lot of it, Moses, as does Santam. What do you want them to do with this conversation? How should they start their week next week, knowing that Moses has the answers? What should they be doing?
Look, I think from our own experience, there's need for more ownership. Because when you work as a private partner in a particular space, you want the political leadership and the administrative leadership of the city to take ownership, so that the programs that we implement can be sustainable beyond the period that you support such a municipality, because we typically support for a period of 3 to 4 years. But if there's no strong ownership, it means that post the period of support, those initiatives will not be sustainable. So you want more ownership. But one of the issues, if I can wrap with it, Gareth, is that disaster management generally in South Africa and fire services can do with a lot more support, both from a resourcing point of view, finances and HR, human resources, so that there's more capabilities to contribute to integrated planning and to be able to coordinate all these role players that we are talking about through this all-of-society approach that we are highlighting in our article.
Oh, Moses, from your mouth to God's ears, I do a fair amount of work with the EMS sector as well, and I can't tell you how much they're struggling. Just the basics, fire engines, ambulances, proper equipment for those highly trained experts and paramedics going out. They just don't have it at a government level. So I certainly hope they're listening to what you say. Always good to hear from you, Moses Khangale, a wonderful management expert in disaster risk from Santam, making sense of it, even how this public partnership with the private sector is supposed to actually work. Because I don't think anybody knows how it's really supposed to look.